So let's look a little closer at India, the world's fifth largest economy, which spends less than 2% of GDP on healthcare. So how would India cope with an outbreak of coronavirus? Well, its numbers are lower than other parts of Asia, 341 confirmed cases, but we're talking about just 52 government testing centres, so there may be many more undetected cases. 8 doctors serve every 10,000 people. In comparison, Italy, which we know is the epicentre of things, has 41 doctors. One state-run hospital serves more than 55,000 people. Millions of Indians, including daily wage workers, are out of work because of a 14-hour curfew, depend on public hospitals. And actually, India had the highest death rate in the 1918 Spanish flu, nearly 18 million, which was more than World War I. So we're going to discuss this now with Sreeram Chaulia, who is a professor and dean of the Jindal School of International Affairs. He's on Skype from New Delhi, and we appreciate your time, sir. Before I go into the deeper numbers, which I mentioned there, what do you think of this idea of a 14-hour curfew? I mean, it seems, well, it seems largely symbolic for such a huge population. Let's put it that way.
No, I think Prime Minister Modi's call was heeded by much of the general public across the country. It's been, the compliance has been good. And in fact, as you know, the social compliance is one of the key factors for stemming the transmission of coronavirus. And many parts of the world are suffering, especially in the West, because they didn't have the social compliance where citizens were not really obeying government orders and directions. So India, has the reputation of being a chaotic democracy where people are very, helter-skelter and doing their own thing. But I think in a time of crisis like this, people heeded the call, and it's more than symbolic, because every day we have like this, which puts a break on the chain of transmission, is good for us, and I think that's why they're going to extend it. So I think
why not do it? Why not do it for longer?
Country, but we have to trade in our liberties for public health and for safety right now.
Professor Chaulia, why not do it for longer? This is the point I'm trying to make, that I don't see what 14 hours achieves. Why not actually say, let's do this for a week? Let's try to, for however long it needs to.
Yeah, there are different, levels of restrictions that have been imposed even before this curfew today, called by Prime Minister Modi. And I think different levels of restrictions will continue going into the future. But like in all other countries, I think the policymakers as well as the average citizens have been worried about the, impact on the economy if there's a complete shutdown, So it's a delicate trade-off between balancing act between, panic and complacency. And somewhere in between, we need to find the right, mix of measures which don't completely lead to loss of livelihoods. As you're mentioning, your reporter was mentioning, hundreds of millions of people live on daily wage in largely informal sectors, and all of them are going to be hurt. So fiscal measures, the state can only support to some extent. So there is this fear that this may lead to an economic collapse, like we are seeing in many other parts of the world. And as you know, developing countries are more vulnerable to the impacts of economic collapse. So I think they have been trying to moderate this, and the numbers have not been so high yet. So I think they're trying to find the balance. Everyone is improvising right now. Frankly, there's no perfect country that's
But isn't that potentially a problem? Isn't that potentially a problem that you've pointed out that the numbers are low, but so is the testing? And it's a country of 1.3 billion people. The numbers, just by the law of averages, surely will end up being higher.
Yes, I'm afraid so. Every day we are hearing larger figures, but exponential growth, or what we call the community transmission, luckily we seem to have evaded it so far. And there are a few factors. One is the social compliance, obedience to rules that I mentioned, but also I think many parts of India is not very exposed to the outside world. It's not so heavily integrated into the global economy and the transportation networks and all that. We do have a large diaspora of 17 million people, some of whom are stuck abroad and wanting to come back, and they're caught in limbo. But if you look at rural India, for example, where still 60 to 70% of the population lives, many of them are completely cut off from, the epicenters like China or Iran or, Europe, and they don't have much going on and comings on with these places. So luckily, the state of relative backwardness, quote unquote, is maybe shielding us from the worst effects of it. So I don't expect it to be as bad as China. We would hope that it should not exceed what South Korea has undergone. which has been relatively successful. And I think under Prime Minister Modi's leadership, there is a sense in the country. I saw today the way people are coming out at 5 p.m. He called them out onto their balconies and to strike some bells and utensils and to come up with a spirit of solidarity and oneness that we are in it together.
Professor Chaulia, I'm going to have to interrupt you. I'm sorry, just because we have got obviously a lot of other countries to get around as well. But thank you for joining us from New Delhi today. We'll stay in